The autumn sun filtered through the tall windows of the Donovan mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Marcus Donovan stood in his corner office on the 20th floor of Donovan Enterprises, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. At 38 years old, he had built an empire that his father could only have dreamed of. Real estate, technology investments, luxury hotels, his name appeared on buildings across 3 continents, but none of that success meant anything compared to the warmth he felt when he thought about the 2 most important women in his life: his mother Eleanor and his fiancée Vivian Chase. Eleanor Donovan had raised Marcus alone after his father died when Marcus was only 12. She had worked 3 jobs to put him through private school, never complaining, never asking for anything in return. Now, at 72, she lived in comfort in the East Wing of Marcus's Connecticut estate, a small reward for decades of sacrifice. Her silver hair was always neatly pulled back, and her gentle blue eyes held a lifetime of wisdom. She spent her days tending to her garden, reading classic literature, and preparing the occasional family dinner that Marcus treasured above any 5-star restaurant meal. Vivian Chase had entered Marcus's life 2 years ago at a charity gala in the Hamptons. She was stunning, 32 years old with flowing auburn hair, emerald eyes and a smile that could light up any room. She worked in fashion consulting, or so she claimed, though Marcus had never seen her actually go to an office. Vivian had a way of making him feel young again, adventurous and carefree. 6 months ago he had proposed to her on a yacht off the coast of Monaco, and she had said yes without hesitation. The wedding was planned for the spring, a grand affair at the estate with 300 guests. Everything seemed perfect. Marcus had the success, the money, the beautiful fiancée, and his beloved mother living comfortably under his care. He congratulated himself on having achieved the American dream. If only he had paid closer attention, he might have noticed the cracks forming beneath the surface of his perfect world. Eleanor sat in the sunroom, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged flowers in a crystal vase. The purple and yellow bruise on her forearm was still visible, even though she had tried to cover it with a cardigan. She glanced toward the doorway nervously, listening for footsteps. Vivian had gone out shopping an hour ago, but Eleanor never knew when she might return. The fear had become constant, a knot in her stomach that never fully released. It had started small, just a few months after Marcus and Vivian got engaged. At first, it was just words, sharp comments delivered when Marcus was out of earshot. Vivian would make snide remarks about Eleanor's cooking, her clothes, her slow pace, walking up the stairs. Eleanor had tried to brush it off, telling herself that Vivian was just stressed about the wedding planning, but the verbal jabs had escalated into something much darker. The first time Vivian had grabbed her arm roughly, Eleanor had been shocked into silence. It happened in the kitchen when Eleanor had accidentally spilled some tea while preparing afternoon refreshments. Vivian's perfectly manicured nails had dug into Eleanor's wrist, and her voice had turned cold and venomous. She warned Eleanor that if she ever embarrassed her in front of Marcus's business associates again, there would be consequences. Eleanor had been too stunned to respond, too frightened to tell her son what had happened. Since then, the incidents had multiplied. A shove here, a cruel yank there, always when Marcus was away on business or occupied with meetings. Vivian had perfected the art of the two-faced performance. In Marcus's presence, she was the loving, attentive fiancée who fussed over Eleanor's comfort and insisted on including her in wedding plans. But the moment Marcus left the room, Vivian's mask would slip, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Eleanor had tried to convince herself that she was overreacting, that perhaps she was being too sensitive in her old age, but deep down, she knew the truth. Vivian didn't love Marcus. She loved his money, his status, his mansions and private jets. Eleanor was simply an obstacle, an inconvenient reminder of Marcus's humble beginnings that Vivian wanted to erase, and Eleanor, who had spent her entire life protecting her son, couldn't bear the thought of ruining his happiness by exposing the woman he loved. So she remained silent, absorbing the cruelty in private, making excuses for the bruises Marcus occasionally noticed. She told him she had fallen in the garden or bumped into furniture, He believed her because he had no reason not to. The guilt ate at Eleanor constantly, but her fear of breaking her son's heart was stronger than her desire to save herself. Marcus returned home that evening in high spirits. He had just closed a $50 million deal that would expand his hotel chain into Southeast Asia. He found Vivian in the sitting room, elegantly posed on the velvet sofa with a glass of wine, looking like she had stepped out of a magazine spread. She smiled brilliantly when he entered, rising to greet him with a kiss that promised more later. They discussed wedding details over dinner. The guest list had grown again, and Vivian wanted to add an ice sculpture and a second band. Marcus agreed to everything, barely listening to the specifics. His mind was already planning the honeymoon, a month-long tour of European capitals. He asked about his mother, and Vivian assured him that Eleanor had enjoyed a quiet day and had gone to bed early. Marcus made a mental note to check on her in the morning but thought nothing more of it. What Marcus didn't see was the interaction that had occurred just an hour before his arrival. Eleanor had been setting the dinner table when she had accidentally knocked over one of Vivian's expensive perfume bottles in the bathroom they occasionally shared. The bottle had shattered, and the scent had filled the hallway. Vivian had appeared within seconds, her face twisted with rage. She had grabbed Eleanor by the shoulders and shaken her violently, hissing that the perfume cost more than Eleanor's entire sad wardrobe. When Eleanor had tried to apologize, Vivian had pushed her against the wall, warning her to stay out of sight for the rest of the evening. Eleanor had retreated to her room, her heart pounding, her body aching. She had cleaned up the broken glass with shaking hands and then hidden away, declining dinner with a claim of fatigue. From her window, she had watched Marcus's car pull into the circular driveway, and her heart had broken a little more. Her son looked so happy, so unaware of the poison that had infiltrated his home. The weeks passed, and Marcus remained oblivious. He was consumed with work, traveling frequently to oversee his various projects. Vivian encouraged these trips, insisting that she could manage the wedding preparations and keep Eleanor company. Marcus trusted her completely, grateful to have found a woman who seemed so devoted to family. He would call each evening from whatever city he found himself in, and Vivian would paint pictures of cozy afternoons with Eleanor, claiming they had watched old movies together or worked on the seating chart for the reception. The reality was far different. With Marcus away, Vivian's cruelty intensified. She criticized everything about Eleanor, her appearance, her old-fashioned manners, her very existence. She made it clear that once the wedding was over, she would convince Marcus to send Eleanor to a nursing home. Vivian wanted the mansion to herself, wanted to host parties with influential people, without the embarrassing presence of Marcus's elderly mother shuffling around in her plain cardigans. Eleanor's spirit began to break under the constant assault. She started spending more time alone in her room, avoiding common areas where she might encounter Vivian. She lost weight, her appetite disappearing along with her will to fight back. The light in her blue eyes dimmed, replaced by a haunted weariness. When Marcus was home, she forced smiles and pretended everything was fine, but the effort exhausted her. One particularly cruel afternoon, Vivian had found Eleanor looking at old photo albums in the library. The albums contained pictures of Marcus as a child, memories of birthday parties in their tiny apartment, Christmas mornings when gifts had been sparse but love had been abundant. Vivian had snatched the album away, mocking Eleanor for living in the past. She told Eleanor that Marcus's real life had started when he became successful, that everything before that, including Eleanor's sacrifices, was just a sad prelude to his actual existence. Those words had cut deeper than any physical pain. Eleanor had given everything for her son, had worked until her hands were raw and her back ached permanently. She had sacrificed her own dreams, her own potential relationships, her entire youth to ensure Marcus had opportunities. And now, this woman, who had contributed nothing, who loved only Marcus's wealth, was dismissing all of it as meaningless. Yet still, Eleanor said nothing. Her love for Marcus was absolute, and she convinced herself that his happiness mattered more than her suffering. She told herself that perhaps once they were married, once Vivian felt secure, the cruelty might stop. It was a desperate hope, one she clung to even as the evidence suggested otherwise. But fate has a way of exposing secrets no matter how carefully they are hidden. And the truth was about to reveal itself in the most dramatic way possible. Marcus had scheduled a business trip to Chicago, a 3-day conference that would require his full attention. He had kissed Vivian goodbye that morning, reminded her to take care of his mother, and headed to the airport. His private jet had taken off on schedule, and Vivian had watched from the window with satisfaction, already planning how she would use these 3 days to further break Eleanor's spirit. What Vivian didn't know was that the conference had been unexpectedly cancelled. A major storm system was moving through the Midwest, grounding flights and forcing the organizers to postpone. Marcus received the notification just as his plane was approaching Chicago airspace. The pilot had turned the aircraft around, and by early afternoon, Marcus was back in Connecticut, heading home hours earlier than anyone expected. He decided to surprise Vivian, perhaps take her out for an impromptu dinner at their favorite restaurant. He thought about stopping to buy flowers, but decided against it, eager to get home. As his car pulled up the long driveway, he noticed how quiet the estate seemed. Vivian's Mercedes was parked in its usual spot, so he knew she was home. He smiled, imagining her surprise when he walked through the door. Marcus entered through the front entrance, calling out a greeting. No response came. The house seemed unusually silent, almost eerily so. He set down his briefcase and walked toward the main staircase, intending to check if Vivian was upstairs. But then he heard something that made him freeze. A voice, strained and pleading, coming from the direction of the east wing where his mother's rooms were located. He moved quickly but quietly toward the sound, his businessman's instincts telling him something was wrong. As he approached his mother's sitting room, he heard Vivian's voice, sharp and angry, saying something he couldn't quite make out. Then he heard his mother's voice, trembling and afraid, words that would haunt him forever. Marcus reached the doorway just in time to see Vivian grab his mother by the arm and violently shake her. Eleanor's face was contorted with pain and fear, and she was begging, actually begging Vivian not to hurt her. The scene before him was so shocking, so completely at odds with everything he thought he knew, that for a moment he couldn't process what he was seeing. Vivian had Eleanor backed against the wall, her perfectly manicured hand gripping the elderly woman's arm so tightly that her knuckles were white. Eleanor's cane had fallen to the floor, and she was struggling to maintain her balance. Tears streamed down Eleanor's weathered cheeks as she pleaded in a broken voice that Marcus had never heard before. The shock lasted only seconds before it transformed into something else entirely. A rage so pure and absolute that Marcus felt it surge through his entire body. He had never considered himself a violent man, but in that moment he understood how people could lose control. The woman he loved, the woman he had planned to marry and build a life with, was attacking his mother, the person who had sacrificed everything for him. Marcus's voice, when he finally found it, was deadly calm. He said Vivian's name once, just once, but the tone carried enough weight to make her spin around in shock. Her hand released Eleanor immediately, and her expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise, fear, and then calculation, as her mind worked frantically to find an explanation that might save her. But there was no explanation that could erase what Marcus had witnessed with his own eyes. Eleanor collapsed against the wall, her body shaking with sobs of relief and shame. Marcus moved past Vivian without a word, going straight to his mother and gently helping her to a nearby chair. His hands were steady as he checked her for injuries, but inside he was trembling with fury. Eleanor tried to speak, tried to explain, but Marcus quietly told her it was all right, that she didn't need to say anything right now. He retrieved her cane and made sure she was seated comfortably before he finally turned to face Vivian, the woman he had thought he knew, the woman he had imagined spending his life with, suddenly looked like a stranger, and not a pleasant one. Vivian had regained some of her composure and was already launching into her defense. She claimed that Eleanor had been confused, that she had been trying to help her to bed when the old woman had become agitated. She insisted that Marcus had misunderstood what he had seen, that his mother sometimes became disoriented and aggressive, that Vivian had only been trying to calm her down. The lies spilled out smoothly, practiced, as if she had prepared for this moment. But Marcus had heard his mother's words, had seen the terror in her eyes, had witnessed the cruelty in Vivian's grip. He looked at Eleanor, really looked at her for the first time in months, and suddenly saw what he had been too busy and too trusting to notice before. The weight loss, the way she flinched at sudden movements, the haunted expression she wore when she thought no one was watching, the bruises he had accepted such simple explanations for. How had he missed it? How had he been so blind? Marcus told Vivian to stop talking. His voice was still calm, but it carried an authority that made it clear this was not a request. He asked his mother directly if this had happened before, if Vivian had hurt her before this moment. Eleanor hesitated, her loyalty to her son's happiness warring with her need to finally tell the truth, but the relief of not having to hide anymore won out, and she nodded, tears streaming down her face. The admission broke something in Marcus. He had prided himself on being a good son, on providing for his mother after all she had done for him, and all this time, under his own roof, she had been suffering while he had remained blissfully ignorant. The guilt was crushing, but it was paired with a determination that nothing like this would ever happen again. He asked Eleanor how long it had been going on. Her voice barely above a whisper. She admitted it had started not long after the engagement, that it had gotten worse over time. She apologized for not telling him sooner, saying she hadn't wanted to ruin his happiness. Marcus felt his heart break at her words. His mother had endured abuse to protect his feelings, and he had been too wrapped up in his own life to see the truth. Vivian's strategy shifted when she realized her lies weren't working. She became defensive, then angry. She accused Eleanor of being manipulative, of trying to come between them because she was jealous of their relationship. She claimed that Marcus's mother had never approved of her, that the old woman had been hostile from the beginning. Vivian painted herself as the victim, subjected to Eleanor's passive-aggressive behavior, and now being falsely accused when she had finally defended herself. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He had seen the evidence with his own eyes, and more importantly, he knew his mother. Eleanor had never been manipulative or cruel in her entire life. She had welcomed Vivian into their home with open arms, had tried repeatedly to build a relationship with the woman her son loved. Every accusation Vivian made only served to reveal more of her true character: selfish, cruel, and willing to hurt a defenseless elderly woman to get what she wanted. Marcus made his decision in that moment, a decision that was both painful and absolutely necessary. He told Vivian to pack her belongings and leave his house immediately. The engagement was over, effective that instant. She was no longer welcome in his home or in his life. The wedding was cancelled, and she had 1 hour to collect her things before he called security to escort her out. Vivian's face transformed into something ugly. The mask of the sophisticated, loving fiancée was gone completely, replaced by rage and desperation. She threatened him, said he would regret this, that she would take him to court, that she would destroy his reputation. She claimed she had given up years of her life for him, that she deserved compensation for the time she had invested in their relationship. The money and status she had pretended not to care about suddenly became the focus of every word she spoke. Marcus remained unmoved. He told her coolly that she had exactly 1 hour, and that his lawyers would be in touch regarding the return of the engagement ring and any other items that belonged to him. He also made it clear that if she ever attempted to contact him or his mother again, he would pursue legal action for assault and harassment. His voice carried the weight of a man who had built an empire and wasn't afraid to use every resource at his disposal to protect what mattered most. Vivian realized she had lost. Her threats had no power here, not against a man with Marcus's resources and determination. She stormed out of the room, her high heels clicking angrily against the marble floors. Marcus could hear her moving around upstairs, slamming drawers and cursing. He didn't care. His only concern was the frail woman sitting before him, the mother who had sacrificed so much and deserved so much better than what he had unwittingly allowed to happen. He pulled a chair close to Eleanor and sat down, taking her weathered hands in his. He apologized, his voice thick with emotion. He told her he was sorry for being blind, for not protecting her, for allowing that woman into their home. Eleanor tried to reassure him, to tell him it wasn't his fault, but Marcus wouldn't accept her forgiveness so easily. He had failed in his most basic duty as a son, and he would have to live with that knowledge. They sat together in silence for a while, Marcus holding his mother's hands as she gradually stopped crying. Outside, they could hear Vivian loading her car, the sounds of her departure harsh and angry. When the noise finally stopped and they heard her Mercedes roar down the driveway, both of them felt a weight lift, as if the house itself was breathing easier without her poisonous presence. Marcus helped his mother to her bedroom, made sure she was comfortable, and brought her some tea with honey, the way she had made it for him countless times when he was a child. They talked late into the night, Eleanor finally sharing all the details she had kept hidden, every cruel word, every painful incident, every moment of fear she had endured. Marcus listened, his heart breaking with each revelation, his resolve strengthening to make this right somehow. In the following days, Marcus canceled the wedding arrangements. The deposits were lost. The explanations were awkward, but he didn't care. He told close friends and business associates the truth, that he had discovered Vivian was not the person he thought she was, and that protecting his mother was his only priority. Most people understood. Some gossiped. Marcus ignored them all. He arranged for a doctor to examine Eleanor, documenting her injuries for potential legal action if Vivian ever tried to retaliate with false claims. The doctor confirmed bruising consistent with rough handling and recommended counseling to help Eleanor process the trauma she had experienced. Marcus found the best therapist in the state and made sure his mother had appointments scheduled. But more than medical care, Eleanor needed time to heal emotionally. The trust she had placed in her son's judgment had been shaken, and though she never blamed Marcus, he could see the lingering fear in her eyes. She jumped at sudden noises, hesitated before speaking up about her needs, and often seemed to be bracing herself for criticism that no longer came. It broke Marcus's heart to see what Vivian's cruelty had done to his mother's spirit. Marcus made changes in his life. He cut back on travel, delegated more responsibilities to his executives, and spent more time at home. He made sure Eleanor knew she was safe, that she would never have to fear mistreatment in her own home again. They took walks in the garden together, prepared meals side by side in the kitchen, and slowly rebuilt the comfortable relationship that Vivian had nearly destroyed. Weeks passed, then months. The gossip about the cancelled wedding faded as new scandals captured society's attention. Vivian had disappeared from their social circles, apparently having moved to Los Angeles in search of new opportunities. Marcus heard through mutual acquaintances that she had already attached herself to another wealthy man, a tech entrepreneur with more money than sense. He felt sorry for the man but didn't warn him that lesson was not his to teach. But something had changed in Marcus beyond just being more present for his mother. The experience had opened his eyes to his own privilege and blindness. He had been so focused on building wealth and status that he had forgotten what truly mattered. His mother, who had lived modestly and loved unconditionally, was worth more than all his business deals combined. And there were countless other elderly people in the world who were vulnerable, who had no one to protect them from abuse and neglect. Marcus began researching elder abuse, shocked by the statistics and stories he discovered. It was far more common than he had imagined, often hidden behind closed doors just as it had been in his own home. The elderly were dismissed, their complaints ignored, their experiences invalidated. They became invisible to a society that valued youth and productivity above wisdom and experience. An idea began to form in Marcus's mind, one that grew stronger each day. He had resources, connections, and now he had a purpose. He would create something meaningful, something that would help vulnerable seniors and honor the woman who had raised him. It would be his way of turning the pain and guilt into something positive, something that could make a real difference. He spent weeks developing the concept, consulting with social workers, attorneys, and advocacy groups. He researched the best practices in elder care and protection. He assembled a team of dedicated professionals who shared his vision. And finally, 6 months after the incident that had shattered his illusions, Marcus launched the Eleanor Donovan Foundation for Elder Rights and Protection. The foundation offered multiple services: legal advocacy for seniors facing abuse, financial assistance for those struggling to afford quality care, educational programs to train caregivers, and a hotline where elderly individuals could report mistreatment and receive immediate help. Marcus funded it generously, ensuring that money would never be an obstacle to helping those in need. He named it after his mother, both to honor her and to ensure that her suffering would have meaning beyond their personal experience. Eleanor was deeply moved by her son's gesture. She insisted on being involved, despite Marcus's concerns about her reliving traumatic experiences. But Eleanor was stronger than she looked, and she understood that her story could help others. She began volunteering at the foundation, speaking at community centers and senior facilities about the warning signs of abuse and the importance of speaking up. Her gentle presence and obvious sincerity made her an effective advocate, and many elderly people found the courage to seek help after hearing her speak. The foundation grew quickly, its mission resonating with communities across the state, and eventually across the country. Marcus found himself deeply involved in the day-to-day operations, discovering a sense of purpose that his business ventures had never provided. Making money was easy, changing lives was meaningful. He had spent years accumulating wealth, and now he was learning how to use it in ways that actually mattered. It was at a foundation fundraiser, about a year after Vivian's departure, that Marcus met Claire Bennett. She was volunteering at the event, helping to coordinate the silent auction and ensure that elderly attendees were comfortable and had everything they needed. Marcus noticed her immediately, not just because she was attractive, though she certainly was, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile, but because of the genuine care she showed to every person she interacted with. Claire was 35, a social worker who specialized in elder care. She had been volunteering with the foundation since its inception, drawn to its mission because of her own grandmother, who had suffered in a neglectful care facility. When Marcus introduced himself, she didn't fawn over his wealth or status. Instead, she engaged him in a thoughtful conversation about improving the foundation's outreach programs. She challenged some of his assumptions, suggested innovative approaches, and made it clear that she cared about results, not recognition. Marcus found himself drawn to Claire in a way he hadn't expected to feel again. But this time, he was careful. He paid attention to how she treated others, especially those who couldn't offer her anything in return. He watched how she interacted with Eleanor when she thought no one was looking, noting the genuine warmth and respect in every exchange. He took his time, building a friendship before considering anything more. Eleanor noticed, of course. Mothers always do. She saw how Marcus's eyes followed Claire around the room, how he smiled more easily when Claire was near. But more importantly, Eleanor saw who Claire really was. A woman with a good heart. Someone who had dedicated her career to helping vulnerable people, who volunteered her limited free time because she genuinely cared about making a difference. Eleanor kept her observations to herself, not wanting to pressure her son, but she felt hopeful in a way she hadn't since before Vivian had entered their lives. Months passed, and Marcus and Claire's friendship deepened naturally. They worked together on foundation projects, grabbing coffee to discuss strategies and staying late to review grant applications. They discovered shared interests beyond their work: a love of classic films, an appreciation for hiking, a tendency to adopt stray animals. Marcus told Claire about Vivian, about what had happened and what he had learned. Claire listened without judgment, sharing her own story of a failed relationship with someone who had seemed perfect but had turned out to be emotionally manipulative. Their first official date happened almost by accident. They had been working late at the foundation office, reviewing applications for a new caregiver training program. When they finally looked up, they realized it was past 9 o'clock, and neither had eaten dinner. Marcus suggested they grab something at a nearby diner. Nothing fancy, just food and conversation. That simple meal, stretched into 3 hours of talking and laughing, the kind of easy comfort that can't be forced or faked. Unlike with Vivian, there was no rush, no pressure, no performance. Claire never asked about Marcus's wealth or properties. She never suggested expensive restaurants or designer shopping trips. She was content with simple pleasures, walks in the park, movie nights at home, volunteering together at the foundation. She treated Eleanor not as an obligation to be tolerated, but as a person to be valued, someone whose stories and wisdom were worth hearing. Eleanor watched her son fall in love again, and this time she felt only happiness, no reservations or concerns. She got to know Claire during casual dinners at the house, afternoon teas in the garden, and foundation events where they worked side by side. Claire asked Eleanor about her life, her experiences raising Marcus alone, the challenges she had overcome. She listened with genuine interest, never dismissive or patronizing. And when Eleanor occasionally struggled with moments of anxiety or fear, residual effects from her ordeal with Vivian, Claire was patient and understanding, never pushing but always supportive. One Sunday afternoon, about 18 months after Vivian had been banished from their lives, Marcus found his mother in the garden, tending to her roses. He sat beside her on the wooden bench his father had built, decades ago, watching her work with practiced ease. After a comfortable silence, Marcus told Eleanor that he was thinking about asking Claire to marry him. He wanted to know how his mother felt about it, if she had any concerns or reservations. Eleanor set down her gardening shears and looked at her son with those wise blue eyes that had seen so much. She told him that Claire was nothing like Vivian, that she could see the difference clearly. Vivian had been all surface beauty and charm, hiding cruelty and selfishness underneath. Claire's beauty came from within, from a genuine goodness that couldn't be faked. She made Marcus happy not through expensive gifts or exotic trips, but through simple presence and authentic connection. Eleanor gave her blessing without hesitation, tears of joy in her eyes. Marcus proposed to Claire on a quiet evening at the foundation office, surrounded by files and photos of the lives they had helped change together. There was no yacht, no audience, no grand gesture designed to impress, just two people who had found something real in each other, built on shared values and genuine affection. Claire said yes without hesitation, and they celebrated with Eleanor over homemade lasagna in the mansion's cozy kitchen. The wedding, when it finally took place, was nothing like the extravaganza Marcus had planned with Vivian. It was a small ceremony, in the garden Eleanor loved, with only close friends and foundation colleagues in attendance. Eleanor stood beside Marcus as he married Claire, her heart full, in a way it hadn't been in years. She had her son back, truly back, not distracted or deceived, but present and genuine. And she had gained a daughter-in-law who treated her with kindness and respect, who valued her presence rather than resenting it. The foundation continued to grow, touching thousands of lives across the country. Marcus and Claire worked together, their partnership extending from their marriage into their shared mission. Eleanor remained involved as long as her health permitted. Her testimony and presence, a powerful reminder of why the work mattered. The mansion that had once housed cruelty and deception became a home filled with love and purpose. Marcus never forgot the lesson he had learned, that terrible afternoon when he had witnessed Vivian's true nature. He remained vigilant, not just in protecting his mother, but in being aware of injustice and suffering wherever he encountered it. His wealth and success, which had once been ends in themselves, became tools for creating positive change. And every time he saw elderly individuals finding safety and dignity through the foundation's work, he thought of his mother's courage in finally speaking up, even though it had taken far too long for him to listen. Years passed, bringing the inevitable changes that time delivers. Eleanor's health gradually declined, as it does for all who live long lives. But she spent her final years surrounded by love, in a home where she was cherished and valued, secure in the knowledge that her son had found genuine happiness with a woman who truly deserved him. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81, she left behind a legacy of grace and resilience that continued to inspire the foundation bearing her name. Marcus grieved deeply, but found comfort in the work they had built together. the Eleanor Donovan Foundation expanded its reach, opening regional offices and helping to pass legislation protecting elder rights. Claire stood beside Marcus through his grief, offering the same patient support that defined everything she did. Together, they ensured that Eleanor's suffering had meaning, that her story helped prevent others from experiencing similar pain. On the 10th anniversary of the Foundation's founding, Marcus stood before a crowded ballroom full of donors, advocates, and elderly individuals whose lives had been changed by the organization's work. He spoke about his mother, about the day that had shattered his illusions and opened his eyes to what truly mattered. He talked about how easy it is to become blind to suffering when it doesn't directly affect you, how privilege can insulate people from uncomfortable truths. But mostly, Marcus spoke about love. The kind of love that endures sacrifice, that protects the vulnerable, that chooses what's right over what's easy. His mother had loved him that way, working herself to exhaustion to give him opportunities, and when he had failed to protect her, when he had chosen his own happiness over her safety, she had still loved him enough to set him free from guilt and help him build something meaningful from the ashes of his mistakes. The crowd gave Marcus a standing ovation, but he deflected the praise. This wasn't about him or his redemption. It was about the thousands of elderly individuals who deserved to live their final years with dignity and safety, who had earned respect through their decades of contribution to the world. It was about changing a culture that dismissed and devalued its oldest members, that allowed abuse to flourish in shadows because people found it uncomfortable to acknowledge. As Marcus looked out at the audience, he saw faces young and old, wealthy and struggling, all united in the belief that every person, regardless of age, deserved to be treated with kindness and respect. He saw Claire standing to the side, her eyes shining with pride and love, and in his heart, he felt his mother's presence, the gentle spirit that had shaped him into the man he had become. The foundation that had started from tragedy had become a force for good, preventing countless others from experiencing what Eleanor had endured. And while Marcus would have given anything to go back and protect his mother from the beginning, to have seen through Vivian's deception before damage was done, he had learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a better future, one choice at a time, one life protected at a time. Marcus Donovan had learned the hard way that the people we love most deserve our attention and protection, not just our money and good intentions. He had discovered that true character reveals itself in how people treat those who are vulnerable, those who cannot fight back or offer anything in return. And he had found that genuine happiness comes not from beautiful facades and social status, but from authentic connections with people of integrity and compassion. The mansion in Connecticut still stood, its rooms filled with light and warmth. The garden Eleanor had loved continued to bloom each spring, tended now by Claire, with the same care Eleanor had shown. And somewhere in that house, in frames scattered throughout the rooms, were photographs that told the real story, not of wealth and success, but of a mother's love, a son's redemption, and the family they had built on foundations far stronger than money or status could ever provide. The scars from that terrible time never fully disappeared, but they had transformed into something more valuable than smooth, unmarked skin. They became reminders of important truths, guides for making better choices, and the foundation upon which real meaning was built. Marcus Donovan had started his adult life chasing the American dream of wealth and success. He had achieved it all, and nearly lost everything that mattered in the process. But in the end, he had found something more valuable than any business deal or luxury mansion. He had found purpose, genuine love, and the knowledge that protecting the vulnerable was the highest calling a person of privilege could answer. And as the foundation continued its work, year after year, touching lives and changing systems, Eleanor's legacy lived on, not as a victim who had suffered in silence, but as a woman whose courage in finally speaking up had sparked a movement that would protect countless others for generations to come. Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special. Leave us a comment about what you felt, and subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time.